Good evening. Lately, we have been hearing more and more often that we are closer than ever to achieving the goal of a special military operation. At the same time, Kyiv, as it refused to negotiate before, continues to do so, continues to refuse. In your opinion, how long can the fighting continue?
Good evening again. Well, I will probably say that I was more than sure that the fighting itself would end, and we would achieve peace in any case already this fall of 24. Because according to all the scriptures, everywhere I saw that the end should be precisely at this time. Well, now we see, to put it bluntly, probably somewhere what happened in the Kursk region. In fact, if we had not managed to stop the enemy, it would have put us back then on the brink, probably, of signing a treaty on any terms, because the situation was very difficult and dangerous for our country. Thanks, first of all, probably again, to the military, the spirit of the Russian soldier. Well, and I will not belittle my unit. Thanks, first of all, to the Special Forces, Akhmat, we managed to stop this enemy. And I will say that this shameful future that our enemies were preparing for us did not come true. So I think that our units are still moving forward at such a fast pace, liberating a huge number of populated areas and territories every day. It seems to me that this question will still arise in the near future and will be closed.
You are the deputy head of the main military political directorate of the Ministry of Defense. Please share your impressions of what this fighting spirit is like in our army now, and is the situation different from, say, 2022?
Our troops have always had a very high fighting spirit. Our potential has always been high, great. This is always shown by the history of the Russian state. That is, the Soviet Union does not matter, but the fact itself is that in spirit probably, we have no equal in this world. This is certain, but at the same time, we must understand that spirit and potential, they also grow and fall depending on the circumstances that unfold in this or that period of time on our front lines. That is, it happens that in certain areas, some units can lose heart for a certain period of time. Well, it seems to me that, all the same, our main advantage was that we always managed to quickly restore our fighting spirit, potential, and move forward again. Although for a while, sometimes it happened that some areas, say, some units were thrown back. But at the same time, if we take the general component of the spirit of the Russian army and our units, we must note that these are units with very high spirit.
All thinking people understand perfectly well that, in fact, everything that we observe today and now is not a confrontation between Russia and Ukraine. It is not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but in fact, it is a war of Russia against everything that the West is very aggressively imposing on the whole world. It is a fight against a way of life led by an ultra-liberal ideology. It is a fight against values alien to us, and in fact, for the liberation of our recent compatriots by historical standards occupied by the enemy ideology. You talk to captured soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. How ready do you think they are to get rid of the ideological garbage imposed on them?
The ideology that we see today, which is trying to crush us, to capture the West, it was initially laid down in the speeches that people like Brzezinski and other people who prepared this ideological component in order to conduct military actions that we now call a proxy war, delivered to the masses. Why is it called a proxy war? Because the entire NATO bloc is fighting us through Ukraine. America first and foremost in all European countries. So what is the gist of it? They, having developed their ideological components, which I can't call anything else but Satanism, are trying to absorb that part of the earth where they at least somehow strive for God. This is unacceptable to them. Today there is a war of God's troops against the troops of the Antichrist, the Dajjali as we call them, the Muslims. That is our war, which apparently only through the prism of the fact that military actions are taking place, where we are supposedly fighting with Ukrainian formations, it is in fact being waged on all planes of our life and everyday life. And in the spiritual and moral components, first of all. Look at what these troops of the Antichrist are doing on the other side. Look, they are fighting us not only with weapons. Look at those Christian values that are being completely destroyed there, the churches that are being taken away from the Orthodox. Look at those holy places for the Orthodox that have been taken over today, swallowed up, and some kind of satanic Sabbaths are happening there. That is, they are trying to kill this common history of ours. They are trying to kill faith in God. They are trying to kill family values, universal human values. For what? In order to stand next to us with their satanic essence and try to further crush us, to destroy Russia and force us to become their slaves. And this is not only a component of armed conflict. We must understand this, first of all. Therefore, I would probably say in general that today we are already at the finish line, when the coming of Jesus is near and our open, as they say, hostility with the army of the Antichrist, or, as we Muslims call it, the Dajjal, this war, it will already arise today. In the near future, it will become obvious to everyone, and each of us will have to choose our side. Whose side are we on? Are we on the side of God, or are we on the side of the devil, the Antichrist, the Dajjal, as we call him?
Do you think it is possible, from your point of view, to compare the situation that is unfolding now, the special operation, and the situation that was in Chechnya in the 90s? After all, back then, the West actively supported the terrorists who cut off the heads of Western hostages. Among the Chechens, there were those who were initially enchanted by Jokhar Dudayev, the ghost of independence. But then they realized that, in general, normal life is impossible without Russia. How do you assess the situation?
The Chechen campaign, both the first and the second, they are also events that flowed from this fascist, satanic, as they say, West. They also did not just unfold, not by themselves. And of course, today Ukraine has stepped on the same rake that the Chechen Republic stepped on at that time. But I want to point out one thing, and everyone should hear it. You know, I heard Vladimir Vladimirovich say such words literally several times that at that time in the Kremlin we had representatives of American Special Services, the CIA, who directly controlled the processes in the country. I ask any person a question. Were the Chechens enchanted by Dudayev, you see? Of course. Colonel Dudayev is brought to the Kremlin, given the rank of general, sent to Chechnya, imposed on the Chechen people. All the bandits are released from all Russian prisons, sent to Chechnya, to the zone. Then they allegedly all escaped from there. These people are starting to form a nationalistic agenda. Why? Because it is easiest to raise some layers of the population on nationalism. But at the same time, Russians should always know one thing for themselves. The Chechen people fought against Dudayev and his army before Russia started fighting them. My father died in the first battle against the Dudayevs, Basayevs, and Maskadovs. My elder brother died in that battle. Then, when the Federals entered Grozny, my uncle and my second cousin entered Grozny with them and died. If someone tells us that the Chechen people are somehow against Russia or the Russians, this is a misconception. It was we who fought against them. Against those people who were imposed on us by the Kremlin. They did not come to us themselves. It was a policy at that time that was aimed at the collapse of Russia. And these people, they carried out the tasks that were assigned to them by the people who were in the Kremlin, and directly. As Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin said, they controlled the processes in the country. Do you understand? That is, we must clearly distinguish this situation. Then, by the will of the Almighty, God gave us a president like Putin. Putin nevertheless accepted the right, as they say, agenda for himself. He chose the right path and clearly decided to separate, to drive out the enemies from our country, who sit with us all the way up to the Kremlin. And it was precisely his work that led to us starting to cleanse ourselves of these enemies. Now, what is happening on the territory of Ukraine? We once recklessly took them and gave them to our enemies to sit in. Again, the same power that was in the Kremlin at the time allowed this to happen. Again, this same knife went to the same Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and today he is forced to clean up what the previous government did.
A country like ours, of course, can only be weakened by undermining it from within. Because our enemies periodically try to sow this artificial discord between representatives of different religions, different nationalities, we see this. Meanwhile, we see how in the combat zone, as during the Great Patriotic War, both Christians and Muslims fight side by side. And this is actually an example for all of us here in the rear. Everything that is happening there now, on the fields of special operations. What do you think about this?
You know, in fact, this is probably the main topic that I initially, from the first days of the SVO, began to promote among the guys at the front. I will say this, I am proud that I am the commander of the most international unit. About 50% of my guys are Russian, 25% are Chechens, 25% are representatives of all other nationalities. Here is what is most interesting. Priests come to me, they say, Abt Aranik, can we report to the top that the main person who is trying to raise orthodoxy at the front is you? I say, please, I will be happy if you are real representatives who say that they are Christians, will be true Orthodox believers. It is beneficial for us. It is really so. I was one of the first who invited priests to Akhmat. I told them, please work with these guys. In fact, we have a very interesting situation. After all, if you really look at the numbers, how many Orthodox do we have? There are many people who wear a cross around their neck, and we talk to all the Orthodox priests, 1%. Well, that means the churchgoers. Absolutely right. So now the question arises. I am a Muslim. I am a true believer. I know what Orthodoxy is. I know what Islam is. And I am trying to do everything to ensure that I have priests in Akhmat, so that I have imams, so that each of them works in their own direction. Just the other day, I transferred another priest to my unit. This is very important work. There is nothing stronger than faith in God. And if this person knows that he is going to fight for God, for something that was not sent to them, and if he understands that he is in a holy war, as I usually say, if one of my guys there, our relative recently died, and the guys there came, well, so upset, I scolded them. I say, why are you so upset? He is in heaven. He is a happy man. You and I don't know yet where we will end up, and he died in a holy war. So what could be higher than faith in God? And here is the desire to die on the holy path, knowing that you are dying for your faith and fatherland. And here is something very important. We must do everything possible so that this becomes the property not only of those people who are fighting there, but also the property of those people who are behind us. If I have been trying for so long to unite everyone, to tell everyone that there are no differences between us, there are no cool nations and not cool nations, or there is no religion, one that was higher and another lower. You and I are one component. Only in this way can we survive in this world. Only in this way can we stand against this army of the Antichrist. Not individually. Therefore, let us hope that our rear will also become infected with this disease even more.
The statements of a number of Islamic figures who are trying, well, to de-Russify our national history, to question the fact recorded in the Constitution that the Russian people are the state-forming people, caused a great resonance the day before. What would you answer them?
If someone wants to argue with the fact that Russians are a state-forming nation, I would tell them that they are idiots. There is nothing to argue with here. Russians are a state-forming nation. What's interesting is, you'll notice all the time I call on Russians to, what? Please, give birth. Please create large families. You are a state-forming nation. And if Russians do not give birth, if Russians do not take charge of themselves, it is clear. If there will be no state-forming nation, if there will be no Russians, excuse me, it is the Russian state. All the same, in the long term, we will never feel ourselves in a peaceful life. Why? Because we will not be given peace and quiet until either we defeat our enemies or until we lose and disintegrate as a state and cease to exist. Since God has prepared for us the fate of victors, an automatic question arises. Who can dispute that Russians are the main skeleton around which all other nations have gathered? No one, if he is sane. But there is one more thing. Russians should also understand this. If you are a nation that forms the state, you have the greatest responsibility. Why is it the greatest responsibility? Because if you are not able to regulate all these processes, excuse me, no one on the side will be able to keep our country in the state we are in. And you, of course, must regulate these processes very clearly. Do everything so that no one feels secondary. Make the Russians powerful, strong, and the backbone of this state, so that everyone else considers themselves equal in this family. Then there is no force that will separate us.
Another question, very relevant. The central bank announced its intention to remove all religious buildings from new banknotes because people of different traditions, different nationalities, and different faiths live in Russia. But can a believer, be it a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist, have any kind of aversion to a temple of another religion? How do you feel about this?
If you have already started talking about the fact that representatives of other religions live here, well, then make the next banknote with a mosque, and the third with a synagogue, and the fourth, as they say, with a Buddhist temple. Well done, handsome. And not to do it in such a way that we need to take away what we have. For those who don't know these things, I would say something like this in the Quran. Here is the holy book of Muslims, and in it there is such an ayah that sounds something like this. It is voiced for Muslims. If you seek those who are closest to you, you will certainly find that the closest to you are those who call themselves Christians, because they have monks, priests. They truly believe in God, and there is no arrogance in them. I am a Muslim, and I say this. Translation from the Quran. So the question, for me as a Muslim, a Christian temple is God's house. This is clearly stated in my religion. So the question arises, why should I be unhappy that there is a church on a banknote? For God's sake, it is better than having some satanic sign on it, which is unacceptable to none of us. Let them leave this, and on the contrary, make other banknotes that will have everything connected with our religion and faith in God.
This is my opinion, of course, despite the state policy to support families with children. Now, by the way, the year 2024 is ending. The year of the family, the birth rate continues to decline. You already mentioned this today during our conversation. At the same time, radical initiatives, such as, for example, a complete ban on abortions or the introduction of a tax on childlessness, cause a very sharp reaction in society. What measures do you think could help Russia overcome its demographic crisis?
We live on 1/6 of the planet Earth. This is the richest territory in the world. We have the largest volumes of fresh water. Just so you know, in the future, this is what everyone will fight for. The next resource, yes. Absolutely right. We probably have the largest volumes of everything we need to live. At the beginning of the Second World War, there were 148 million of us. How many people left there? Other. I won't take it upon myself to voice it now. There are only a few of us anyway. It's not that we can't share and run away. On the contrary, we should try to drag everyone into this dormitory of ours and ask, let's live together. Let's protect this welfare that our state has together. Now, this state, which has such resources, that is, our great motherland Russia, has the most important task. Task number one, strategic task number one, is the demographic situation. Let me tell you, I visited several higher education institutions, met with students, talked to them. I tell them all, listen, yes, for the past 20, 30 years they fell out of this agenda. For some reason at that time, people believed that they had to live for themselves. Why? Because we wanted to be like Europeans. Western ideology, namely the ideology of Satanism, it entered our home and slowly began to eat us from the inside. Now the question, you ask the question, are you married? No. Why? Well, I said it today. Well, I've been living with a girl for 10 years now. We have a civil marriage. I can't decide whether I'll get married or not. I ask a question. We must initially, from school, from the first grades, instill in these children an ideology that should lead them to the point that, as soon as the time comes, they will find a person who is close to them in spirit. They should get married, have children, create a family. It is impossible to sew someone up somewhere in a certain period so that they give birth to children if you have not prepared a program so that this stream grows from, it turns out, its childhood state, so that it grows to the state that it is impossible to just cohabit, live in a civil marriage for decades. And then, one day, you decided, no, I won't marry her, but I'll go look for another. You're wasting your life again, it turns out, looking for another. And in the end, when you come back, realizing that this was yours, as they say, your happiness was in her. She says, no, sorry, goodbye. You've already left once.
And in conclusion, I would like to ask you, given the fact that we are approaching the end of 2024, to make some kind of wish for us, for all the people of Russian civilization, as is now enshrined in the updated concept of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation.
I have always said that Russia is the country that will be the basis for the revival of divine universal human values, which God is not capable of giving us. I would like to wish the residents of our country peace, happiness, love, family well-being, so that our population would come more and more to God, so that we would strive for those values that God is not capable of giving us, and so that we would try to unite on the basis of these values, so that we would become the family that will never look back at our enemies who are somewhere. Let God make our country that very thing, perhaps that cradle from which there will be a revival of all these values. Let God make it so that our country becomes a locomotive in the pursuit of peace in order to unite around itself all countries that strive for peace and prosperity and for those values that God is not capable of. And it is clear, of course, let God make it so that we become higher and more in love for each other. Aptaronish, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for what you do. I always watch your channel, and I will say, I get a lot of benefit from your channel even for myself. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the program that you are trying to convey to our masses. We work for the glory of God. Thank you for the glory of God. Let's all work hard.